Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, July 15th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, NBC and MSNBC news correspondent Jacob Soboroff. His book, Separated: Inside an American Tragedy. Also on the program today, FEMA sends mobile morgues to Texas as coronavirus cases surge across the South, the Southwest, and the West, and the Midwest. Also on the program today, Trump reroutes all data from CDC to White House control. Joe Biden unveils a $2 trillion investment in 100% green energy by 2035. And progressives win big in the Texas primaries. And poor Jeff Sessions. He loses everything. Trump administration folds on the international student ban. Postal Service memo details the assault is from within. Feds execute the first person in 17 years. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is hospitalized. And lastly, Barry Weiss, Andrew Sullivan, and Zeb Gorka all head to greener pastures. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Welcome to the program. Sorry for the slightly late start. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty. We have resolved that to the best of my knowledge, and certainly that is my hope. Thank you for being here. It is Wednesday. We have horrible things are happening in huge parts of the country in terms of coronavirus. And I think it's going to be that way for a bit. Hopefully there'll be a little more competence and a little more care taken and a little more vigilance, but we shall see. The number of infections and deaths, we're hitting new records in different states every day now. And like we said, the FEMA is sending nearly a dozen mobile morgues. 14, what they call mortuary support units to Texas in response to a July 11th request from the state's Department of Emergency Management. That doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be used now, but they're anticipating their need. Arizona is also ordering extra mobile morgues. And I imagine, I don't know, are we going to see James O'Keefe and all those right-wingers go down there with their video cameras to prove that nothing's going on there? Are they still producing those videos?
You know, maybe somebody should produce more videos like that. Not James O'Keefe, obviously, but to actually see this stuff. I mean, this seems like that's part of the airwaves.
That's part of the problem, is when you have these things that are happening in areas that are not, centers of national media, they don't get as much attention as you would hope. Donald Trump gave a press conference. I don't know what we even call it. A press conference, a rally in the Rose Garden. And he was all over the place. Not terribly new, but some of the content was Donald Trump apparently is getting reports back from his friends at Mar-a-Lago as to things are going swimmingly in Florida for him and other places. And how does he know? I mean, he's asked a question, do you think you're the underdog in this race? And of course not.
Sir, you just spent the better part of an hour explaining why Americans should choose you and not your opponent. Yesterday you said on Twitter, be careful what you wish for. I guess the question is, do you see yourself as the underdog in this race? Do you see yourself losing in the fall?
No, I don't. I think we have really good poll numbers. They're not suppression polls, they're real polls. You look at the intercoastal in Florida, you look at the lakes, you see thousands of boats with Trump signs, American signs. You've got the Trump Pence sign all over. You look at what's going on. You look at bikers for miles and miles riding up highways proudly with their signs. We won a race where it was the same thing, 2016. We had polls that were fake. They turned out to be fake. Not all. A couple of them got it right. 3 of them, to be exact. 3 of them. One of them was unsuspecting. But they got it right. They were very proud of it. But we had in 2016 something even more so, but we got in, and we had 306 to, I guess, 223, which was a tremendous margin of difference. You remember they all said he cannot get to 270. I went to Maine a number of times where we just freed up lobster fishing and fishing.
Yeah. There you go. I mean, the real polls are measured by motorcyclists and boats on the intercoastal.
Various recreational videos.
The intercoastal boat poll. The intercoastal boat poll is looking very good. Very good.
I've not heard that term, suppression polls.
Yeah.
We'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
What do you say about the one poll that it got it right unwittingly? Well,
I think what he's saying is that, and let's be clear, the polls were more or less correct in terms of the popular vote. They were not so accurate in a couple of the states where he won. And apparently there was one outlet that he thinks is fake news that probably got it right. That's the only thing I can imagine is what he's talking about.
It's so specific to him and petty. Like nobody, what are you talking about?
It's, I know it would be more funny if it wasn't so horribly, horribly tragic. Meanwhile, as you know, for many of us, probably all of us, our daily routines have gone a bit haywire in the past few weeks. There has really been one good thing that's come out of this for me. Well, maybe there's been a couple, but it's hard for me to imagine. But the one thing occurred to me last night was my kids are taking it seriously to brush their teeth, because I made it clear, like, look, we're probably not going to go to the dentist for a while, and this is where your teeth will get messed up. And I was smart enough 3 months ago, getting our first refill, we had left some toothbrushes behind, but my kids are all quipped up. Quip is here to keep us on track. They deliver the oral care essentials to you. Good health starts with good habits. I've said this many times. Oral hygiene, incredibly important. I'm old now. I realize maybe some mistakes I made as a child. Don't make these mistakes. Quip makes it easy for you to brush and floss better. The Quip electric toothbrush has timed sonic vibrations with 30-second pulses to guide a dentist-recommended 2-minute routine. Gives you 4 pulses. You switch from every quadrant of your mouth. There's even a downsized version for kids. Saul has one of those. Mila has an adult-sized one. Paired with Quip's anti-cavity toothpaste, Saul gets the watermelon. He loves it. and an eco-friendly refillable floss dispenser. I use that one. You get all the ingredients teeth actually need. Quip brush head, toothpaste, floss refills are delivered on a dentist-recommended schedule every 3 months for just $5 each. Shipping is free. Join over 3 million happy customers using Quip, starting at $25. I'll tell you something. The timer on the toothbrush is, it's a revelation. Because now I don't have to harass my kid, and the whole thing where you sing the ABCs. First of all, when you sing it, you can't brush your teeth. And his whole attitude is, if I sing it, it doesn't matter how fast I sing it. If I've actually sung it, then it counts. But now I don't have to say a word. I just wait for the toothbrush is telling him. But it's also great for adults too. You got to brush your teeth, folks. Super important right now. You got to do it properly. Sometimes I'll double up. I'll do 4 minutes. I don't care. If you go to getquip.com/majority right now, you get your first refill free. That's your first refill free at getquip.com/majority. Get, GETQUIP, getquip.com/majority. Quip, it's the Good Habits Company. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We come back, we're going to be talking to MSNBC and NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff on his new book, Separated: Inside an American Tragedy, that is, in many respects, a memoir of his reporting on the Trump administration's basically policy of kidnapping children, as far as I'm concerned. But we'll be right back in just a moment. Phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program MSNBC and NBC correspondent Jacob Soboroff on his book, Separated: Inside an American Tragedy. Jacob, welcome to the program. And, I was saying before we got on, both congratulations on the book and the many awards that you won for your reporting, but also, I just want you to know how much it's appreciated. It's a really important story. And you were one of the key figures in my mind who got it wider attention.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate that. And it's good to be on with you. And look, I happened to be at the right place at what really was the wrong time for all of those children and their families. And there were certainly other reporters like my colleague Julia Ainsley and Lomi Creel from the Houston Chronicle and Caitlin Dickerson, who were really way more dialed into this than I was. But unfortunately, I did. I had the misfortune of seeing this with my own eyes, and it changed me forever. That's for sure.
This is, and I had said before you came on, it's more or less a memoir of your reporting. You follow through the book a man and his teenage son as they attempt to, or I should say, you retell their story, how they attempted to seek asylum in this country from Guatemala, and largely, the story of this administration is, it seems to me, is, this answers the question of stupid or evil. It doesn't have to be either or in many respects in the way they handle this. But I want to start with this. separated. This is a maybe double entendre is too strong of a word, but the title means two things to you. Explain that.
It does. I mean, to me, it's obviously physically what happened to Juan and Jose, who you mentioned, the father and son from Guatemala, who were separated for nearly 5 months. Juan nearly deported without his son, coerced into signing away the right to reunite. And there were, 400 parents who were not as lucky as him to have an immigration, lucky is not the right word, but fortunate to have an immigration lawyer who won his freedom and his reunification. And the torture and the trauma, and those aren't even my words, those are American Academy of Pediatrics, Physicians for Human Rights. I mean, this was a government-sanctioned tortured program of these children, in the words of Physicians for Human Rights, the Nobel Peace Prize winning organization. And that's the very literal definition of separated. And then to me, what separated really means, and I think it's probably the more important definition, is I think a mental separation that too many of us, myself included, had from the reality of what's been going on in our country for decades with regard to immigration enforcement, a bipartisan deterrence-based immigration enforcement that stretches back at least to the Clinton administration, ran through the Bush, Obama years, and Donald Trump supersized it like no one else had ever done. And certainly he's the only president to systematically separate children like this. But it's the idea that he was teed up to do this. He was teed up to do this by the American immigration system. And so that's the other way I look at separated. And it's why I call the book Inside an American Tragedy, because that's really what this is. This is the United States of America where this happened.
Well, I mean, just give us a little bit of the history so that, the people can understand qualitatively what happened here in terms of the difference from the Obama administration. Now, the Obama administration set a record for deporting people. And
they sure did.
And they were the ones, or at least under the Obama administration, is when this sort of the genesis of this idea took place. But my understanding is that it was quickly dispensed with, but there were some holdovers. I mean, talk about the difference.
Correct.
Qualitatively and quantitatively in the policies.
Yeah, so family separations did happen during the Obama administration in a very limited capacity, always with the safety and the security, the best interest of the child as the deciding factor. There were certainly people within the administration, career, generally law enforcement officials who had wanted to try separations as a larger deterrence method. And you're right, the Obama administration was harshly criticized by immigration activists and lawyers and advocates who rightly criticized them for deporting more people than anyone in American history, any president in American history. But when family separations made it to the Situation Room, and Cecilia Munoz and Jay Johnson are both on the record in the book, the idea was dismissed outright. The idea that you would systematically separate every parent and child coming into the country in order to scare them away from coming here, because the medical experts said this will traumatize them for life. And there's one expert who was involved in the separations on the ORR side who said to me in the book, childhood trauma means a century of suffering. And I think that the Obama administration realized that. And it was after the Trump administration came into office, but really not long after. I write about in the book a meeting on Valentine's Day 2017, just weeks after the president was sworn in the office of Kevin McAleenan, then the acting commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, where officials were in a celebratory mood, according to people who were in the room, miming, stamping passports with denied for migrants coming to the country, asylum applications. And it was in that meeting that the idea of family separation again came up, and it was soon forced out into the public by Julia Ainsley, who I mentioned. Then John Kelly confirmed it on CNN, talking to Wolf Blitzer. And after, a really brief public outrage in the very early days of the administration, they didn't talk about it again until it exploded in the spring of 2018. But all along, they were working on this. And in El Paso, they had a pilot program. And those 700 children that Caitlin Dickerson reported on were being separated, despite the fact that the administration said they pulled back from the policy. And just to put a really fine point on it, Nobody's ever done what the Trump administration did. It was deliberate. It was systematic. I detail it very extensively in the book. And that's despite the best efforts of people trying to stop it from within the government.
And so, and to be clear, my understanding is that when the Obama administration would separate children from their parents, it was a function of the parent having committed a crime beyond, to the extent that it's it's a civil offense, but a crime beyond crossing the border, but had to do with, like, if they were in possession of drugs or if there was some type of abuse that was going on. Whereas, and like you say, it was entertained in the Situation Room as a method of deterrence. Like, hey, things are going to be so horrible for you. We're going to take your children away. Don't come here. And that's what was ultimately adopted by the Trump administration. There was some machinations involved in criminalizing going across the border in a slightly different way, so that there was sort of like a legal apparatus in which this was done. But so I want to talk about this point, because that part about that you write about the reporting that you have of celebration. I mean, to me, that seems indicative of a cultural problem at the Customs Border Patrol that seems a little problematic. I mean, you want people to be excited about their job, but it's not necessarily like, if people think that their job is just to keep immigrants out, maybe that's a problem.
Yeah, don't forget, and I write about this too in the book. The only time I've ever come face to face with Stephen Miller was in a Colorado ballroom during the primaries in 2016. And, their whole campaign promise was to end catch and release. The act of releasing asylum-seeking families into the interior of the country as they await their immigration proceedings. And this was the dream scenario for the right-wing ideological folks in the administration and some of the career folks in law enforcement. And I should say, like, I've met many compassionate, caring line agents from the Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection officials at the ports of entry, and officials up and down the chain of command. And many of them spoke out to me, also from HHS, about what they saw as the cruelty of this policy. But there were people, and it's no secret that, they were ideologically aligned with Stephen Miller, who really wanted this to happen and pushed forward from the earliest days. And they obviously were successful. That's what this boils down to is we should have seen it coming. They promised it. The president talked about it on the stage at the Republican National Convention as I stood there in the middle of the Texas delegation surrounded by people wearing cowboy hats. And it just didn't occur to me. And that's why I write about this from a personal perspective. I missed it too, right? Like, I ended up being one of the journalists who documented this firsthand and saw the conditions with my own eyes. Yet the fact that it happened and the fact that I couldn't believe what I was seeing with my own eyes is in some measure my own fault, because this was laid out. This was laid out very clearly, and only by going back and digging deeper and learning about the meaning you talk about, and many other subsequent, key inflection points, did I learn how premeditated this was. And not only, I used to say there's no plan to reunite, there was no plan to separate. I was wrong. There were plans to reunite. They were just rejected, passed over, ignored by the Trump administration, who wanted to do this so badly. They pushed it into existence without waiting for a mechanism to be able to even put children and parents back together if and when the policy was ended.
All right, so let's talk about some of those inflection points. You mentioned that it is revived, early in 17 as an idea. Kelly has to admit it. People assume it goes away. What happens with that policy after that? Like, what is how does it wind its way back into actually being executed? It starts with that pilot program.
That's right. And this was in the El Paso sector of the Border Patrol, obviously directly across the border from Ciudad Juarez. And they began separating in the summer of 2017. And if were it not for the reporting of Lomi Creel, who I mentioned from the Houston Chronicle, this would have never surfaced. But when it did surface, it was basically quickly shut down by Kevin McAleenan, and I write about this, and I have the emails between him and Gloria Chavez and Carla Provost, key Border Patrol officials, basically flagging that this was coming out in reporting and in newspaper articles, and they decided to stop it. And so it was shut down for a time, but that was the beginning of the development of the national policy with people from within the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and ultimately Health and Human Services, who were very keenly aware of how badly this would injure psychologically the children. And there's one gentleman, Commander Jonathan White, who was ultimately the federal health coordinating official who was tasked with putting these children back together, who continued to warn McAleenan and got on the phone with him, as a matter of fact. And there are the emails that document this in the book to say, look, if you're going to do this, not only do you need to have the bed space, and they talked about separating as many as 30,000 children, 5 times as many as they ultimately separated before it was stopped, amidst the outrage. And they went forward with it anyways. That's where, that's where I want everybody to focus, to realize. I mean, the thing that I realized is that they could have stopped this. The Trump administration could have stopped this. The child welfare experts attempted to stop this. Even people within ICE attempted to stop it. There's a woman named Claire Trickler McNulty as CBP and ICE, started talking about this more going into 2018, that the technological systems weren't in place in order to be able to put the family and children back together, because it was simply an IT deficiency. They couldn't keep track of both, because kids were cared for by HHS and adults were cared for by DHS, and the systems didn't talk to each other in a sufficient way. And McNulty and others in ICE alerted their supervisors to that, and their own boss, Thomas Homan, along with McAleenan and Francis Cisna from USCIS, the legal immigration portion of DHS, all signed a memo recommending to Kirstjen Nielsen to adopt the policy, which she ultimately did.
And but there was also, in terms of Nielsen adopting that policy, there were DHS lawyers, at least one, who wrote like this could be a violation of multiple laws.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, John Mitnick, who was a official in the Bush administration, then went to Raytheon, then came back into the Trump administration to become the general counsel of DHS, warned in a previously unpublished legal memo that family separations were potentially violative of several American laws, and more importantly, the U.S. Constitution, that they would violate the due process rights of migrants coming to this country. And Kirstjen Nielsen got that advice. And when she got the memo, this legal memo from Mitnick, which was attached to the decision memo I just described to you from her 3 deputies, the truth is she didn't sign it right away. She had it and she had it in late April and didn't sign it until early May. And it sat on her desk. She considered, obviously, the fact that she was given this advice. By the way, in the meantime, she was preparing for an interview with me in early May for a Dateline documentary we were doing. And the emails are in the book, that she was also focused on that. And she went forward with signing on the dotted line for option 3, family separations, even though she was very clearly warned, and you can read it for yourself, that it could be a violation of the Constitution. So, it just rings hollow to me. I should just say, it just rings hollow to me when there's I haven't seen much remorse, expressed by her, but she has spoken out publicly in the wake of this. And the idea that, this was anybody but her decision ultimately is for me, it's hard to swallow.
So when was it that she signed that memo?
I think it was May 4th or May 5th, 2018, early May, the first week of May.
And we should say that is after, right? The ACLU has filed a lawsuit against ICE, if I'm not mistaken.
Against family separations. That's what's so wild about it, Sam, is that Mitnick specifically, the general counsel of DHS, specifically in the memo, cited what's known as the Miss L case, a Congolese mother who was separated at a legal port of entry because DHS claimed CBP claimed she wasn't the mother. They didn't have biological proof, and not until they did a DNA test did they reunite them. They took her from her child, sent her to Chicago. She didn't even know what Chicago was, whether it was a man's name or a city or whatever. Kept her in this basement detention center, and then moved her to another detention center in the San Diego area. And that was, the lawsuit was filed in federal court in February 2018 by the ACLU, and then later became a class action lawsuit. And Mitnick advised Nielsen that, hey, this case, in this case, it's already in federal court. This whole policy could be thrown out on due process grounds. And she knew it. She knew about the case because I have emails in the book that she was emailing about news articles about the case. And yet she still went forward with the policy.
And she knows, and she's also heard by from Jonathan White, who you said commander of the U.S. Public Health Commission Corp. I guess it's part of HHS. I'm not 100% sure. I even know what that is.
Right. It's they report to the Surgeon General. They're the folks you see. I mean, right now they're being dispatched to deal with the coronavirus. And by the way, that's the whole thing. It's like, you had to send out public health officials that normally are dealing with the response and recovery to things like Hurricane Maria, another Trump disaster, incidentally. Or tornadoes or public health emergencies. And instead they were forced to deal with the man-made disaster of psychological trauma, thrust upon these children.
So, okay. And then by May, or I guess it's April. So just like somewhere around that time, the Attorney General announces that we're going to have a zero tolerance policy, which means that every parent who comes across the border with a child will be separated. And then, like, here's the thing that I find just sort of stunning. They create this whole apparatus, not just, I mean, obviously to separate them at the border, you need to, there's logistics involved, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the places in Texas that you saw, in Brownsville, in McAllen, and one of them, which was an old Walmart. But you have the logistics of like, how are we going to house these kids? And everything that's involved in that, like, maybe we'll bring in social workers, maybe we won't at one point, maybe, et cetera, et cetera. But then they basically disperse them out to the wind. And I would imagine like there is a certain amount of planning and that's involved with that. And yet they're not keeping any records essentially, or any type of like central database
right.
where anybody's going.
Exactly. That's the problem. The record keeping was the problem, because I have a lot of respect for folks that I've met in Health and Human Services, and specifically what I know about the Office of Refugee Resettlement, the small agency under what's called Administration for Children and Families within HHS that cares for these children. But as our mutual friend Chris Hayes said at the time, these children who came with parents were rendered unaccompanied, right? They were taken from their parents and put into a system designed for children who come to the country by themselves. So, I think HHS and ORR got a lot of the animosity because that's where the children ended up. And I did see them, in that former Walmart, the 250,000 square foot former Walmart in Brownsville. That was the first report that I had done on this that night on Chris's show. But it wasn't, I think they were the wrong target, right? Because the kids wouldn't have ended up there with professional licensed social workers, was it not for the decision of the politicals in Homeland Security and the Trump administration.
So they're down. What you're saying is they're downstream. They're downstream on the decision tree, as it were, and they're doing their best to deal with something that they have no policy control over.
That's exactly right. And I write about learning about this in real time in the book, that these facilities had to get variances from their state governments, because they're licensed childcare facilities, in order to hold more kids than they were licensed for, because they became overcrowded due to the separations from parents, because they didn't calculate. In fact, I should say they did calculate, and Jonathan White warned they should calculate separations could result in a huge influx of children, but the administration didn't take the advice and they weren't ready for it. So all of a sudden, in Casa Padre, the former Walmart, you've got 1,500 boys, ages 10 to 17. Hundreds of them had been separated from their parents. Instead of 4 beds per room, you've got 5 beds per room. These children are there, not expecting to be there, stuck inside 22 hours a day, doing Tai Chi and watching Moana in the loading dock of a former Walmart. It becomes this additional shock on top of this process of taking one of the most dangerous journeys you can possibly take in the world in order to get here for refuge. And then all of a sudden, like Juan and Jose, they cross the border in San Luis Rio, Colorado, Mexico. They get to Arizona, and all of a sudden they're brought to the Yuma Border Patrol station, and they're taken from one another, and they didn't see each other for 5 months. And that was the beginning of the process for all these kids. And you're right. The children ended up sort of in this downstream part of the process where they never would have ended up otherwise. Likely, they would have been released after maximum 20 days in detention because of the Flores Settlement Agreement. They would have been in the interior of the country waiting for their asylum hearings. And for the ones that get lawyers, the vast majority of them end up showing up for those asylum hearings because they want to be here legally and they want to be a part of American society.
And just to be clear, the law of the United States is that you cannot seek asylum. Tell me if I'm wrong, but this is my understanding. You cannot seek asylum until you step on U.S. soil. And so the stepping on U.S. soil is actually part of the process of seeking asylum. And yet what Customs and Border Patrol was doing was saying, you stepped on U.S. soil, you're here illegally, we're going to separate you.
You're under arrest. Yep. And even in between ports of entry, right? Like areas with walls or without walls, but not like the checkpoints you drive through if you're going to Mexico. So you would encounter someone in a green uniform, a Border Patrol agent, rather than someone in a blue uniform, a customs person who, like you, same kind of people you would see at the airport. All of the migrants, refugees that were crossing the border, including Juan and Jose, were looking to turn themselves in to the Border Patrol agents, the line agents in the green uniforms. They weren't looking to run away and be chased by the agents and escape into the interior of the country. They wanted to see them, say, I'm here to seek asylum. And Juan and Jose, by the way, were fleeing narco violence in their home community in Petén, the department in Guatemala, where the vast majority of drugs that come into the United States transit through. And they got themselves into some trouble, not by their own fault, but because Juan had sold a vehicle and the narcos had wanted the vehicle, and then threats were made on his life and then his son. And so they decided to leave their wife and mother and siblings and travel together here. And so when they got here, the whole idea was, hey, Border Patrol, we want to be here. We want to start this asylum process. Please take us to the facility so that we can get going. And instead, that's when the separations were happening.
And from the United States perspective, the idea is, okay, we want you to send a message to, your family back in Guatemala and your friends and whoever that there's no asylum opportunity here. If you come here, you're going to lose your child.
And that's deterrence. I mean, that is how the Trump administration was teed up to do this. The Clinton administration in 1994, there was an official document that the Border Patrol produced called Prevention Through Deterrence, which said, let's invest in technology and infrastructure and manpower in order to make migrants, this was the first wave of walls, cross through more dangerous and deadly locations, or at least have to make that choice, because maybe if they know that, they won't come. They want to risk their lives. Well, guess what? That deterrence never stops people from coming from desperate situations, and people continue to come, and people died in a greater percentage relative to the amount of people who were coming across the border. And DHS was obviously supersized during the Bush administration post 9/11. Obama did what he did. We've already discussed that. And then Trump took the idea of deterrence to this place where we're going to do something so horrible. And Katie Waldman, who is now Katie Miller, Stephen Miller's wife and the vice president's spokesperson, said it to me at the time. The idea is to not only scare the migrants, but disturb members of Congress to such an extent that seeing this act perpetrated on these families will get them to change the laws in order to be able to detain families indefinitely and to deport children who come here by themselves immediately, which incidentally they're doing anyways now. under the guise of the coronavirus.
I was putting her in. I was saving her for a moment, but since we're there, the quotes that you have from her are. I mean, people want to know what kind of person marries Stephen Miller. The answer is in your book, but this I just want to reiterate this point that she is basically saying if we show families suffering enough at the border, we will be playing on, because this dynamic in terms of like Democrats and Republicans, frankly, it plays out in a bunch of different ways. But this dynamic is we're going to show these the Congress people how much suffering we're inflicting on people, and that's going to provide the leverage for them to give us the less harsh version of what we want to accomplish.
They all said it. The president said it too. It's now it's up to Congress to change the laws. And in fact, it was in the executive order. I think the official title of the executive order Trump signed on June 20th, 2018 was affording Congress the ability to change immigration laws or something like that. They wanted to use this to scare migrants from coming and to force Congress to change the laws, and they failed on both counts.
We should also say that she had a quote to the effect of like, people told me if I go down to the border or when I have children, my attitude towards this will change, or if I go down to the border and see them suffering. Nah, didn't work.
The full exchange, and you read it in the book to get the, I'll paraphrase it here, but basically I was at the dinner with her and Katie Tur, my colleague from MSNBC. And we were shooting this documentary series, American Swamp, that we had done last year. And after one night of shooting, Katie and I sat down with Katie Miller, who was still Katie Waldman. And I think Katie Tur was curious and was asking her about, like, what was it like to defend the policy? And Katie said she told a version of the story that she had told me before and has told other people. And subsequent to the book coming out, other people have come forward and said they've heard similar versions of the story from her, that she was sent to the border in order to become more compassionate, and it didn't work after we had all seen the separations. And I said to her, which I had said to her on multiple occasions as well, are you a white nationalist? I mean, I'll never forget what I saw. Are you serious? Because I almost thought, like, you got to be kidding. And she said, no, but I believe if you come to America, you should assimilate. Why do we have little Havanas? Or why should we have little Havanas? Again, get the exact language in the book. But that was it right there, right? Like, that's where this comes from within the administration. Despite the best efforts of people to stop it, that's the underlying philosophy, feelings, ethos that allows someone, in my opinion, to defend this policy so vociferously, which she did, And it's weird because I liked working with Katie Miller. She gave me access, as I write about in the book, to these facilities, and I wouldn't have seen them were it not for her. She's a person who's easy to talk to and easy to be around. And I was as startled as anybody that not only she allowed herself to be in this position and defend this policy, and I consistently had conversations with her about that, but that she would speak so openly about it in this way. And looking back today, now knowing what I know, it all makes so much more sense.
You'd mentioned the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Just talk a little bit about Scott Lloyd. I mean, I think these are names that people should know because, like you say, a lot of these people have been redeployed to the coronavirus response, to the extent that there is any from a federal standpoint. But it's also like, one of the problems I think we have in this country is that from administration to administration, sometimes it's political appointees, sometimes it's career folks. There's no accountability. And which is why I think, what you've written here is so important, particularly, in regards to like Kristen Nielsen, who, at various times has tried to pop her head up and start on some type of rehabilitation tour. But Scott Lloyd, you write about him. Just tell us who he was.
Sure. Scott Lloyd's no longer in the government, but he was a lawyer for the Knights of Columbus who became the head of the Catholic fraternal organization that became the head of ORR. And, he contends he had the experience. He had been to Iraq working on refugee issues. And his first controversy in the Trump administration was around whether or not he was going to allow migrant women to receive abortions, young women, in the custody of ORR. And that caused Jonathan White, who was in charge of the Children's Refugee Program, to quit, to go to another part of HHS, where he ultimately was tasked with sort of unwinding the mess of family separations. And Lloyd, what I write about Lloyd, and by the way, one official who worked closely with Lloyd says to me in the book, he's the most prolific, in his opinion, the most prolific child abuser in American history. The only quote Lloyd gave me on the record for the book was to dispute that, and you can read it in the epilogue. Scott Lloyd, in reaction to Caitlin Dickerson's bombshell story on April 20th, I think it was in print on April 21st, 2018, ran into, again, Katie Miller, who basically asked him about how did the number 700 leak from inside ORR of separated children.
Let me just slow you down here so that people, let me just catch everybody up. So the first story comes out, and it is about there being a list of 700 children who have been separated. And it ostensibly, it's the only sort of record of who these kids are, right? And who their parents are, theoretically. And all right, I just want to catch people up on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So that's important to note. ORR there's a guy by the name of Jim De La Cruz, another career official, who was keeping an informal list. By the way, he kept it back into the Obama administration when they were separating kids on a piecemeal, whatever the total number was, a handful of times, or again, in this relative to the Trump administration, they didn't separate anybody. But Jim De La Cruz kept this list. He was keeping it for years. And as the Trump administration ramped up separations, there were 700 kids on the list. Somehow, Caitlin Dickerson from the New York Times got her hands on the list and published the number that 700 children had been separated by the Trump administration. Scott Lloyd, who was responsible for those children, but also responsive to the Trump administration as a political appointee, was embarrassed. He was called out by Katie Miller. And over the weekend, he was sort of stewing about, this article came out on a Friday, about the fact that this had leaked on his watch, and embarrassed the administration that appointed him to his position. And instead of coming back to the office and saying, I'm glad we're keeping this list, and I had been warned by people like Commander White that having separated children would be very detrimental to the health and the well-being of the children, his first instinct was, let's get rid of the list. And so he queried employees in ORR about, why do we keep the list? Can't we just keep track of this on a piecemeal, one-to-one level, and just go back and forth with DHS, whatever? And then they all sit in a room with public affairs officials, and the idea comes up again. And in that room, they say, why are we keeping the list? And the career employees felt, according to people who spoke with them at the time, that they had received direction from Lloyd to get rid of the list. And I write about two people in particular. I mentioned Jim De La Cruz, but also Jalen Suolog, who refused to do so. They refused to get rid of the list that was a critical linkage between parents and children. And had it been destroyed, had Scott Lloyd's instincts been followed through on, who knows what would have happened to those 700 children, or whether or not they would have been able to be reunited. And Scott Lloyd, by the way, since the book's come out, has tweeted me acknowledging that he did briefly consider, in his words, getting rid of the list, but insist that the fact that the data about the kids was with ORR and the data with the parents was with DHS would have meant they would have ultimately been reunited. But that was the whole problem. And that's why they couldn't reunite children quickly in the first place, because there was no formal way to link DHS and HHS ORR data. And so, this instinct by Scott Lloyd could have been potentially catastrophic, according to people who worked there. And again, were it not for these people who pushed back, who knows what would have happened. How
twisted do you have to be to say that look, I was going to destroy the list, but it wouldn't have made a difference anyways. We probably would have been able to figure out whose kids they were. Like, how twisted? Yeah, that's your defense. Your defense is
just
that
I feel the same way. I feel the same way about Scott Lloyd as I do about Katie Miller. It's like it's almost unbelievable that would be the consideration. And if that's what what is it? Is it malintent? Is it negligence? Is it cruelty? Is it some combination of all of them? I guess that's for the readers of the book to judge. But I had the same reaction as you. Scott Lloyd openly admitting that he considered this. By the way, he denied under oath in a question from Sheila Jackson Lee that he ever ordered the destruction of the list in congressional testimony. And he also denied it to Dan Diamond, who first reported that this incident took place in Politico, which is what made me want to dig deeper into it. And yeah, I don't know. The psychological analysis of these folks is not my expertise. I can't do it, but I react the same way that you did. How else are you supposed to react?
All right. So let's just, in terms of the numbers, there were approximately 55. And I say approximately because we really don't know, right? We don't know how many kids were actually taken from their parents.
Nope. We know that 5,400 are accounted for by the ACLU in this Miss L case, which is still going on in federal court 2 years later. We know that 2,800 or so were separated during the main zero tolerance crux of this policy. We know that over 1,000 were separated before, when there really were virtually no records kept connecting them other than Jim De La Cruz's list. And then ACLU says over 1,000 have been separated since. And there are still parents and children amongst those 5,400 who are not reunited. There's family reunification projects ongoing with the ACLU and NGOs who go on the ground in Central America to literally look for parents in places like the highlands, the western highlands of Guatemala, or the dry corridor where I visited to see people fleeing due to starvation and malnutrition. But because of the coronavirus, those efforts have been slowed down, if not stopped, according to Lee Galern from the ACLU, who I talked to last week. And that's it. I mean, you have this number of children. There, by the way, and we haven't talked about it, I'm sure we will, there's still 335 parents and kids on this Friday who could be separated by the Trump administration because they refuse to rule out, they refuse to commit to releasing the families together. They're supposed to release the children by Friday after a judge's order, and they won't commit to releasing the children detained in ICE detention today with their parents.
All right. And I want to touch on that. But so of the 5,400, approximately 5,400 that we know of that were separated, do we have a sense of how many parents are out there, how many kids are out there, and they haven't seen their parents now in maybe a couple of years? How many exist? Do we even know?
We know that 400 parents were deported without their kids during the family separation policy until Trump signed the executive order ending it. We know that the majority of the 2,800 during that time period are accounted for and either reunited or placed with a sponsor, which might be a family member in the U.S. They're out of the government's custody. But we don't know. We just don't. We don't know about the children separated before that time. And we won't until the coronavirus, abates and these lawyers on the ground are able to get to all the parents. It really is basically a detective game that many people have been spending their time on, out of the spotlight, just trying to determine who was even separated and where they may be. I mean, it's just simple stuff like that. I think for some cases, they don't even have the details to be able to do it because the separations, the accounting was so sloppy, and that's a generous description. There was no accounting, the connecting of the two. And so I don't have an answer for you. Lee Galern from the ACLU didn't have an answer for me when I asked him the other day, because now the coronavirus has made this, increasingly more complicated.
Are there kids who have been adopted? I mean, at one point there was reports that the kids were being sent to adoption agencies. Are there kids who are living with adopted or foster families with I mean,
well, foster families, the answer is I don't believe so. And I've seen a lot of talk online about this. Again, ORR is really serious about where children are ultimately placed, and there's a very stringent program for doing so. If they were in a ORR foster family, they'd be considered in government custody. And okay. I think the last child in government custody was released from Zero Tolerance late last year, when the Family Reunification Project brought parents back from Guatemala to be reunited with their children. It's not out of the question for a kid in ORR custody to be placed with an adoption agency, and certainly it was warned that you could have permanent orphans. But I think the reality of the permanent orphan situation is more like parents and children who came here together were separated. A child ends up with a family member in the United States and is unable to be reunited with their parent. I'm not saying,
but at the least that they're,
I don't
maybe
know.
in contact.
I can't say for sure
them.
it never happened. But as far as I know, those are really more the types of situations that these children find themselves in.
All right, so talk about this case with I guess is going down on the 18th. What is the circumstance? I mean, the American government continues to do this. They don't do it in the same way with the same hopes, do they? I mean, the Trump administration has sort of given up, or have they not, on the idea that, like, if we can separate children from their families, then people in Guatemala will get the message. And I have one other question about that theory too. Why would they then, why were they so hesitant or to concede? Was the hesitancy to concede that there was a policy? Like when Kristen Nielsen says, like, we have no policy of separation children. Is she really just covering her own ass there, as opposed to, because I would imagine, like, if the idea is, we want to have such a draconian response to you coming to seek asylum, you would want that publicized, right? I mean, because if people don't know
you have to ask her. You would have to ask her, and I don't know, because
she won't answer me.
I don't have her on the record in this book about this, but she's talked a little bit publicly about this, where she again, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or whatever, but it seems to me she's really parsing words. Because remember, she said in the height of it, we don't have a family separation policy, period. She tweeted it out. And I responded at the time with the 3 facepalm emojis, because it was like I was standing on the border looking at them separate children from their parents, invited by her own Department of Homeland Security. Why are they pursuing it today? Because they can. And they don't want to let it go, and they still believe that they need to be punitive in order to deter migration. And they are, by the way, because the only reason that there aren't more people here at risk of separation is because most children are being turned around immediately now and not even let into the country. Right. And most parents or single adults are being made to wait in Mexico under this MPP program, where they're not even allowed to they basically get into the country and they're turned around and put back into the border cities and said, hey, show up for your court date, sometimes hundreds of miles away. So there just aren't the volume of people in the custody of the federal government now. It's like 25,000 in ICE custody versus 50,000 at the height, and 1,000 kids in HHS custody versus 10,000 plus when I was on the border during separations. There are just not enough families here now to separate the same volume. But the reason the ones are at risk of separation right now is that Judge Dolly G from California, where I am, ordered the release of the children under the Flores settlement agreement, saying it's dangerous to have them in there during COVID. But she doesn't have the authority to release the parents, order the release of the parents. And so it's up to the administration or ICE. They have the discretion. They could do it right now as we're talking. They could do it before the end of this interview, release the parents and children together. But they've chosen not to do that, and instead are trying to work out a scenario where there's a waiver where the parents can sign away the right to their children to let the child be released into the interior, placed with a sponsor, or be deported with their kid, or stay indefinitely detained in the custody of the federal government, which is, again, they're just pursuing the same goals they have all along, to right. Indefinite detention or immediate expulsion.
And how many of those parents, do you know, are saying, oh, okay, I'll be separated from my children?
Zero. They tried to do it in May. There's a spreadsheet I posted on Twitter. Not a single one chose, you won't be surprised, to separate. And they said that they prefer to stay detained with their child when presented with the opportunity. Who would want to be separated from your child? Nobody, because it creates lifelong trauma. Juan, the father in the book, texted me when I was in Yuma, where he crossed with the president a couple weeks ago, and said to me, if you see Trump, ask him a question. Why did you separate us and traumatize us psychologically? This is not rocket science, what separation does to parents and children. I got 2 kids. You don't have to think very long about whether or not you'd want to be separated from your child. And it's backed up by medical science. Why?
Yeah. I mean, I imagine it's possible for people to contemplate it if they don't have children, but for folks with children, it's, it becomes, I don't know. It's like, you want to lock.
We were all kids.
Right.
We were all kids. The idea of being separated from your parents.
Right.
It's just anybody that thinks that this is anybody with any semblance of a moral compass or any type of humanity inside them. I don't understand how you could consider this as something you'd present to parents and children, even if the child went to live with an aunt or an uncle or a brother or a cousin or whatever. Like, it's your parent, and you're going to leave the parent locked up for the simple act, not of committing a felony, but of coming to the country in order to seek asylum, fleeing violence in the first place.
Jacob Soboroff, the book is Separated Inside an American Tragedy. A very important read. We will put a link to it at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. And again, congratulations on the book, and I really appreciate the work that you did in reporting it in real time and ultimately putting it together as a book.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for obviously diving deep into this. I really appreciate it.
All right, folks, I'm going to take a quick break. Head into the fun half. Michael Brooks will be joining me. That's the hope, anyways. Maybe we'll have him. Do we have him on? Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, sign up for the AM Quickie. People are listening to that every morning now as well. 6 minutes, 7 minutes of the headline news. A lot of the stories that we cover on this, sometimes it's a little bit different, but check that out. Also, a reminder, at our merch shop, our masks at shop.majorityreportradio.com, all the proceeds go to the Northwest Immigration Center, and who are helping immigrants. I don't know of their involvement in these cases specifically, but 100% of the proceeds over cost of the masks and whatever's involved in that go to the Northwest Immigration Center. And I should also say, hat tip to Ronald Reagan, we have dug deep into Uline Gate, and apparently there was some extra stock of those Uline things, and we're burning through those, and then we'll be clear of them. I don't even know if we're going to be sending them out through that anymore, but I know that was important to Ronald Reagan. So check that out. Is Michael with us?
He got the notice that the interview ended.
He's not with us yet, though.
All right. Well, make sure you tune into TMBS. That happened last night. Matt, who was on? Is he here?
He is. He's just coming right now. But we had Robert McChesney.
Robert McChesney on TMBS last night. Is that right, Michael? Robert McChesney?
That's correct, Sam. Well done. We talked about the history.
I'm sorry. It's your beard is really starting to fill out.
You know what's hilarious is I actually just trimmed it.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Sam, do you agree with the IMer in the show last night that said Michael's beard makes him look like Dustin Pedroia?
Yes, there is a little bit of that going on. There is a little bit of like, this is late. What year was that? where the what do they call themselves? Do they call themselves dirtbags?
09?
Yeah, where everybody just grew the beards.
Everybody on the Sox grew the beards.
Yeah, it does have that quality.
Back-to-back weeks, Vijay Prashad and Bill Fletcher Jr. both came on and were just like, that beard's great. It looks like Fidel. So, I'm just way too insecure and vain to ignore feedback like that, frankly.
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
So who was on last night and what did they say about your beard?
Robert McChesney was on. He talked about, first of all, he's actually another, guy that I've long admired and read. And so he's done work on media monopolies and democracy for decades.
I think he was one of our very early interviews on the Majority Report. We had McChesney on quite a bit. He's in Wisconsin, right? Is he?
He's from there, but he teaches at Urbana-Champaign in Illinois.
Okay.
So we talked about the internet, the history of media monopolies, but we also talked about, the moment we're in, the uprisings, the election, how to relate to a Joe Biden presidency. I talked about, and I covered this also a lot in the postgame. I think in order to understand Joe Biden's success, 80% Trump's just imploding, but I think that the campaign is actually, they're making some very astute decisions politically, and I'm looking a lot at Stan Greenberg's polling, and it's really explaining to me the kind of campaign they're running. So we talked about that and the Reagan Democrats, a whole bunch of other stuff. Also, a call for a campaign to end hunger in the United States and worldwide, and a look at how they did it in Brazil under the Workers' Party, and a whole bunch of other topics. Patreon.com/TMBS.
Don't forget also check out Nomiki's show. You can find that at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show or youtube.com, The Nomiki Show. Who did she say she was having on? I can't remember now. I can't remember. It feels like it was a year ago already. I'm back into the saddle after a week of vacation. Everything seems like it was happened ages ago. Also, check out the Antifada, patreon.com/the Antifada. Jamie's got that socialist convention. I'm not sure when that's happening, but I think maybe it could be Saturday. I'm not sure. Her conference was, I don't know how these things work in virtual. Is it really still, is it a convention?
I think this is technically a conference.
Yeah, I don't know.
Everything's a conference. Life is a conference.
Now. Everything has been flattened. You can't tell.
Wow. Thomas Friedman time with Sam.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything is Zoom, so therefore everything is not Zoom.
That's absolutely right.
It's globalization.
Let's Matt, what's happening on
tonight? I'll be on Twitch. I'll be playing the new video game Death Stranding and not listening to anything, just chatting with folks. So.
Oh, look at you. All right.
Going traditional.
Wow. Old school.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. Oh, Jamie's panel is on Friday. Presumably after the show, right, Jamie? Check out Jamie's Twitter feed for that.
Make a choice.
Or you'll have to make a choice. We'll see. All right. Quick break, then fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number. You can IM us. I'll be firing that up. You can IM us via the app. Don't forget, I think we have a couple more days of the
I'm losing it, bro.
T-shirt that all the proceeds go to skidrow.org, the Skid Row Trust in LA. All right, we got to take a quick break. Be right back. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238-56-27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
Do.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. Sam Cedar, fun half. Michael Brooks with us today. Let's go to the phones. Calling from an 818 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Dave from Jamaica.
Dave from Jamaica.
Hey, Dave.
818. What's happening, Dave?
Not much. After listening to the interview, I have a question, though. When it comes to these type of jobs where it's either immigration or police work or so on, even with the right type of regulations, I've seen, like, no matter what the job is, there seems to be kind of like a us versus them mentality. And I guess my question is, how do you kind of combat that? Because, like, even in my job where I work with kids that have been suspended from schools, I can see with the teachers, there's sometimes that us versus them.
We just lost you. I don't know what just happened. But I mean, I don't know how you combat that, you know, sort of broadly speaking.
Sorry,
I mean, are you there?
Sorry. I'm still here. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, like, like you say, it takes place not just in, I mean, I think it takes place in the context of everything, right? I mean, you know, you wait tables and have this attitude that, like, it's me against the customers on some level. It's not inconceivable, right? I mean, but I think it's broadly got to be a function of leadership and, you know, structuring things that your system in such a way that, despite the attitude that might be prevalent there, that there's no way for that attitude, there's not enough discretion where that attitude can actually sort of like begin to be harmful to whoever, I guess, you know, the people working there are, you know, there to be in contact with and serve, you know. So I think it's like, I think part of it's cultural. I think there's a certain inevitability that people get oppositional in that dynamic. But I think you've got to structure it in such a way that that tendency for people to have at one point is not you can't really act on it. And I think there may be broader
reduction of work hours help.
Yes. Well, I was going to say, and then I think like if you, I would imagine if, there were 4-day work weeks, there would be less tension, frankly. If our society was providing, some of the basic necessities that we need to live, there wouldn't be a sense of like, I got to go into work because otherwise I can't survive. And I got to deal with these people who are going to be a headache for me. Like, whatever it is, the customers at the hardware store or, obviously it gets worse. I think certain jobs attract certain types of people who like the idea of authority but broadly speaking, that's the only answer I got for you. Appreciate the call, Dave.
Also, before I jump off, I'm reading through Michael's book. I'm really enjoying it. I know you gave it a 1 star, but it's definitely getting up there for 2.5 for me.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
2.5. Wow.
Just kidding.
No, it's fine.
I like that it's short. I wouldn't say I'm not a reader per se, but it's in a language I can understand.
Oh, it's very good for non-readers.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
There was a blurb. Dave, he was just trying to be funny. Don't worry about it. There was a blurb on his book by, I think it was Pat Robertson, and the blurb was something like, I hardly ever read, let alone finish a book. I finished this one.
No, but on a serious note, though, like when I was reading through Marx, a lot of stumbling blocks for me was just the language. And
yeah, of course,
a lot of good books out there are kind of bit too. They're not very common, man, and I'm kind of very common. But that's what I like about your book. It kind of simplifies these concepts.
Michael, you probably didn't. You probably didn't see the.
Appreciate the call, Dave.
The clip we did with Eric Weinstein yesterday, but how non-specific he was is in stark contrast to your book, where I think it introduces people to a lot of different types of ideas, frankly, robust ideas,
yes,
by actual naming them, and
that's one way to go about it. Name the ideas. The other way is just to say like they're good or they're robust or they're chocolatey.
They're chocolatey ideas. There are a lot of chocolatey ideas.
Actually, chocolatey would be like more specific than what the Weinstein brothers. They just refer to like good ideas that we agree with.
There's a lot of ideas that I agree with as well as disagree with in that book. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that.
So Donald Trump had his bat crap. I don't know, press conference yesterday. I don't even know what you would call it. And one of the big topics right now, and maybe I'm a little bit school-centric. What would you call that? Because obviously this is a big question about what's going to happen with my kids. And L.A. and San Diego, two of the biggest school districts in the country, have already said they're going to be remote learning only, distance learning only. In New York, Cuomo Monday basically set up some guidelines so that at least there's some predictability. If I think it is like the infection rate is under 5% for 14 days, then schools can open. If it goes up above like 9%, then they have to close immediately. So at least there are parameters. Right. I mean, there's some guidelines and there's also very strict guidelines as to like what has to happen. Schools need to sanitize themselves every night. There has to be adequate PPE. There has to be.
Would you feel safe with that? Would you do that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, put that aside. Like I'm not
trying to put you on the spot.
No,
I'm just curious.
In all honesty, I'm not 100% sure. It's not even, for me, it's not even just a question of like, do I feel safe? It's like the standard I am willing to, with one child is different than the other, because I think like younger children, I think the risk is a little bit less and the need is a little bit greater than the older child. Mm-hmm. Putting that aside, knowing the clarity you get from these guidelines and why you have them, listen to what Mike Pence says the White House doesn't want happening and how bat crap crazy this is.
Of facilities. But to be very clear, we don't want CDC guidance to be a reason why people don't reopen their schools. We're going to respect whatever decisions are made on campuses like this across the state of Louisiana. All of us are going to put the health of our kids, of our faculty, and families first. But as the governor said, we believe we can do this. We know that the risk the coronavirus presents to people under the age of 18 is very low. But we also want to make sure that we have measures in place that protect faculty that may be vulnerable and also prevent kids from exposing others or bringing home the virus. So
we don't want our CDC guidelines to keep any schools closed. I mean, what are the point of these guidelines if they are not there to help people decide we should close this school? Like, what are the point of the guidelines?
Well, I mean, not only is there no point, but I think that this is Republican governance. Like this, when you cut through all the gibberish, you're basically saying, like, even though this is a national and state policy decisions, that basically, individuals and administrators should make a decision, try to figure out what's best, throw out the guidelines, and you'll probably feel a lot of pressure to reopen the schools because there's an enormous burden on people already economically.
Right.
And so you'll just end up doing it, even if it isn't safe. And that's where we're trying to get policy-wise anyways. On a really brief tangent.
We don't want you in any way to be guided by our guidelines.
Exactly, because we don't ultimately, do we want guidelines? I mean, ultimately, do Republicans want a CDC?
No. And that's why, in fact, the Trump administration has basically said, like, no more giving data to the CDC, because all they're doing is saying, hey, there's a fire going on. No more reporting the fires to the CDC, because they're just going to tell us there's a fire happening. And we're just hoping that nobody's going to smell the smoke.
Absolutely. It was a huge controversy when Bolsonaro first got into office, and it pales in comparison with, millions of other things, probably literally. But getting rid of data collected from the Amazon. Like, we're just literally not going to track these things, so there isn't the information available.
Well,
I think that's the policy, and it's consistent. It was what they've done to the EPA. Today. It's done. I mean,
the interview today, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, when the report came out that there was a list of 700 children who had been separated from their parents, their first instinct was, oh no, we've got to get rid of this list.
We got to stop tracking this stuff. So I think that is, it's a feature, not a bug.
Yep.
I saw a clip, and I think he was right. And, it's fine, whatever. I don't even care about the gotcha. But Bill Kristol was saying, Biden's in a really good position. And the thing that we really need to just make sure of in defeating Trump is that there isn't massive voter suppression. And I was just like, I think that's 100% right. And I think that the Republican judges that you've been working to put on the bench for decades, including the ones that gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013 at the Supreme Court, are not going to be hugely helpful in that endeavor. But thanks, Bill. It was good analysis.
Right, exactly. Bill, here's what I would suggest you do. Take a time machine and erase all of your life's work.
I mean, I'm more forgiving than you in a way. Like, I was just saying, you know what? Why don't you at least say that your judges have had a role in this while you're making that comment? Like, let's start.
Sorry, that doesn't even do it for me.
I don't even care about what does it for. I'm just saying, like, it's just even taken in his own terms. Like, dude, like, come on.
Right. Right. Well, he's just pretending. You know, there was somebody sent us a clip on Twitter, and I don't think we can play it because CBS will demonetize our whole show if we play this one clip. But there was what's his face is Colbert's new show. There is an awesome,
the one with Rick Wilson.
Yes.
There is
what they
tuning
do.
out the news.
Yeah, shooting out the news. Is that what it is?
Tuning
out the news. And it is. Did you guys watch that clip?
Yeah.
It's effing awesome.
They bring Rick Wilson on, who happens to be a very big South Park fan. So I wonder if that's how they lured him on. But they're like, yeah, the cost of running the Lincoln Project, you guys are paying yourselves a lot more than every other political action committee. Why is that?
Oh, but that's not even the worst of it. The worst
really?
of it is, the best of it is that they're saying, so you guys, you've assembled everybody who's responsible for the immiseration of hundreds of thousands of people. Nice. And he gets, we'll put a link to it on the tweet on our page, because it is so worth watching. I was very skeptical, and it was awesome to watch.
Oh, I'll check it out. You know, YouTube has gotten so horrible with copyright and algorithm stuff that this is like a small example, but I was watching a Joe Budden show or clip, and he does, he has a very, very big like hip hop culture podcast. And I kind of assumed like this podcast is on Spotify, and he also has some type of just distribution deal with Revolt, which is Puff Daddy or Diddy or whatever. That's his network. So I kind of thought like maybe this guy has some type of waiver or agreement with YouTube, because part of what they do on the show is play music. Like they're a music show, among other things. And if you listen to the podcast, you hear the music and they comment on it. If you watch it on YouTube, it's all out. It's all silenced out. You can't. They don't even have access to some type of distribution deal. It's extraordinary.
It's weird. I don't know. I mean, we pay an ASCAP license, for the podcast, but it doesn't. YouTube doesn't have any interest in any of that, as far as I can tell.
No.
But check that out. All right, let's get back to Donald Trump talking about schools again. He is asked about
very engaged in this issue.
Well, I mean, it is right now. Schools are the biggest. It is the biggest question mark that.
No, I meant Trump's level of concern that he expresses in this clip.
Well, yeah. I mean, because here he is. He's being asked about LA schools. The announcement that LA schools were going to close, I think, happened on Monday. And here's Trump in the middle of his God knows what's going on. Oh, this is him I guess must have been a pre-interview with CBS.
The Los Angeles School District is the latest and one of the largest in the country to say they're not going back to school in the fall.
Mistake.
What do you tell parents and teachers who feel that it's unsafe to go back?
I would tell parents and teachers that you should find yourself a new person, whoever's in charge of that decision, because it's a terrible decision. Because children and parents are dying from that trauma too. They're dying because they can't do what they're doing. Mothers can't go to work because all of a sudden they have to stay home and watch their child, and fathers. What's happening? There's a tremendous strain on that whole side of the equation.
So it's a balancing act.
It is a balancing act, but we have to open our schools. Well, I also say a decision like that is politics, because we're starting to do very well in the polls, because I'm for law and order. I'm for strong business. Our jobs are coming back at a record level like never. We've never seen anything like it, record level. We're heading up. It's turning out to be the V, just like I built it once before, the strongest economy ever. I'm doing it again. And they don't want that to happen because they think...
Who's the they?
They is the Democrats.
Oh, boy.
Who's the
they? He really can't figure it out, can he? I mean, he's basically saying 70% of parents we're too nervous to send our kids to school. And he's saying, well, that's the fault of the Democrats that you're not going back to school.
it's a balancing act follow-up. Just seems like a really egregious example of how toothless our press is.
Well, that's access.
I know
right
it.
there.
Of course it is, but
let me help you. Let me help you
USSR,
explain
right?
it to us, Mr. President. It's a balancing act, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just horrible.
Well, certainly that's how she got that interview too, because she was at Fox News forever before she went to CBS, which I'm sure was a function of saying, "Hey, I can get this interview." Basically.
Right.
But look,
right.
he
did a
is
Toothless Bar interview too.
He's in bad shape. I mean, I guess literally and figuratively, but like there is no, he's not having any fun. Like, I know I'm going to the superficial aspects of this, but I think he is aware, as delusional as he is, of what the picture is looking like and emerging like. And, you know, again, the school thing is just such it's an illustrative example though of the whole structural problem here, which is that people have not been taken care of in a pandemic depression. And I don't think
that's been by design.
By design, of course.
By
we know
design.
this. We got to get back to work. States are safe. We want to do that because we don't want to pay people's unemployment. We've never had a proper federal response. It's mostly been, you know, consolidation of corporate monopoly capital. And so, you know, I mean, the only reason that you would be rushing to reopen schools is because there are people. I understand that there's some educational concerns, but there's, you know, desperation because people have to get back to work. People don't have childcare. People also don't have tech access. Those are real issues, and they haven't been taken care of. And
I think there are really big educational issues as well. But yes, the work thing is massive. But the fact is that people can't go back to work anyways.
Right.
I mean, anywhere. I mean, the thing is that anywhere where they're going to open up anywhere where they're going to close schools, it's going to be because people can't go to work as well.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to work from home for people when you have kids there too. Obviously, there are, you know, it's a combination of all these things, but ultimately federal government failing to provide resources to states and municipalities is huge. And then they need to step up and provide for individuals. And the other big thing is like, I don't know what percentage of that 70% who are afraid to send their kids to schools aren't reacting to the fact that we have there doesn't seem to be anybody in charge of this stuff who is like, you know, we do not have a federal government. There are people now waiting. I'm hearing reports of people waiting for tests 7, 8, 14 days.
Yep.
There's no point in getting a test if you're going to wait 14 days.
Right.
Because if you're going to go in, you go to test, you just quarantine for those 14 days. And the problem is that people are getting the test and they're not going to quarantine because, well, I'm not feeling anything or went away and then it comes back. I mean, it's a disaster. It is a disaster. Here's Donald Trump responding to the concept of testing delays. It's worse than having no tests. The fact that they haven't ramped up on this is almost worse than having no tests because psychologically you take the test and you feel like, well, you know, I can't know. It's, you know, better that they think they have it and they stay at home than they take the test and they feel that they've actually accomplished something and they don't get the test results back. And you don't know when you're getting the back. Here's Donald Trump on that.
Guidelines.
Okay. Let's talk about testing. Back in March, you said every American who wants a test will get a test. But one of the major labs in the U.S. announced today that the average wait time for a result is about 7 days. So is the national testing strategy working?
Actually, it said it's at least 7 days. Not about 7 days. At least 7 days. But whatever. That's Quest she's referring to. Go ahead.
Testing strategy working?
Working. We have 45 million tests as of, I think, today, approximately 45 million tests. No other country tests like us. In fact, I could say it's working too much. It's working too well. We're doing testing, and we're finding thousands and thousands of cases.
What can you do to speed up the testing result time?
There are different kinds of tests. There are tests that are very good, very strong, where you send it to a laboratory. The best thing we can do is we're doing more and more of them is on-site testing. So you can wait a half an hour, or you can wait In some cases, like in Abbott, you could wait 5 minutes for the test
Will you
result.
push for more on-site testing?
I like it the best. I mean, I like it the best. It might not be as accurate, by the way, but I like it the best.
Yeah, I like how he tries to make it sound like I'm an expert.
I'm the expert.
I've been really digging into it. Might not be as accurate. Has a
digging into
accuracy of
it.
a certain percentage.
The New England Journal of Medicine.
This is like this failure to create an infrastructure to handle this testing. They're going to be talking about this. Historians will be talking about this in decades from now. This is such a monumental failure that it is almost it's like literally you had one job. Like the testing, without the testing, we are effed. Yeah. And like you can't do any contact tracing. You can't rely on people to self-quarantine. You can't, I mean, when they look back on this.
I mean, the way the spread is going out of control right now, it's going to be when anybody involved in healthcare is going to be dealing with the ramifications of this for probably decades, especially in this country.
And the stories that will explain how this happened are structurally a decades-long just complete undermining of public medicine. I'll recommend Lori Garrett, CLAPS, the Collapse of Global Public Health Networks, I think it's called. She documents all of this. But then there's Trump as an individual and in the administration, and I'll recommend again the Edward Luce piece. It's unlocked now in the Financial Times. That I don't think it would be possible to think of another individual that could be as individually indifferent to that. You don't want to reduce politics to personalities 99% of the time, but this is one where it really is inseparable and it really is distinct to him as a personality. And then
Got to be a superlative.
Got to be, yeah. And then the last thing, the lieutenant governor of Texas gave that interview on Tucker too early and wasn't tactful enough. You're supposed to pretend that you don't want grandparents to die, but that's the policy.
Yep. Here's Rush Limbaugh. Now you talk about, you're supposed to pretend you don't want grandpa to die or grandma to die. Here's Rush Limbaugh just basically saying, like, look, we got to suck this up.
Yep.
This is
get used to it. Over 100,000 a day. People are going to die. It is what it is.
It is what it is. We have no ability to control this. I mean, this is so much of this is going to play out. Climate change, we're going to give you a little, here is one of those condensed versions of, here's some cliff notes on what climate change is going to be like. These things are going to happen. We can't control it. There's nothing we can do. It's out of our hands. We just got to live with it. We'll adapt and science will save us. Here's Rush Limbaugh, Medal of Freedom winner.
COVID-19 is too convenient an excuse for a generation of people to just punt. We don't do this. We are Americans. In the Spanish flu, 17, 18, 19, 17, 18, much death. Do you know that there was not one mention of it by the President of the United States at the time, Woodrow Wilson? Never talked about it. There was no national policy to deal with it. There was no shutdown. There was just, hey, go outside, get some fresh air, stand in the sun as long as you can, get some vitamin D, feel better. It had numerous waves to it. It coincided with World War I, which is what Woodrow Wilson's concern was. Soldiers going off to war arguably spread one of the waves. But there was no woe is us. It was just the next in a long line of things that happened to people that they dealt with. Like the Donner Party. You've heard of the Donner Party. Maybe some of you haven't. the Donner Party, the Donner family, and a bunch of travelers trying to get to California over the Sierra Nevada mountain range. They made the mistake of trying to make the trip in the middle of winter. We're talking the Lake Tahoe region. They get to the peak. It was so bad that they had to turn to cannibalism to survive. That's what's noteworthy about the Donner Party. If you read the diaries written by the leaders of the Donner Party, the only reference to how cold it was one sentence. It was a particularly tough winter. It's just what was. They didn't complain about it because there was nothing they could do. They had to adapt. This is what's missing. There seems to be no concept of adaptation. There seems to be no understanding in the millennial generation that we can adapt to this and that we're going to have to. Because there's nothing stopping it right now. We don't have a vaccine. We don't have therapeutics. We can't shut down bars and restaurants every 2 months for a couple of weeks for the next 3 years. We can't do this cycle that we're doing. This cycle that we're doing is not stopping anything. It's not saving anybody. It's not preventing the spread. It's just a knee-jerk reaction to a bunch of shock, scary numbers in the media.
So let me get this straight. The Donner Party was willing to turn to cannibalism and didn't complain about it, but we can't shut down bars and restaurants on a regular basis.
Yeah, millennials have to adapt, but we can't shut down the bars and restaurants for months at a time.
On one hand, a nice, calm, understated capacity to engage in cannibalism. On the other hand, the shutting down of bars and restaurants is absolutely unacceptable. It's also, I'd
like to see him adapt to having cancer without any modern treatment. They didn't, if you got cancer with the Donner Party, you just live with it, buddy.
It was a particularly tough winter as I withdrew from heroin. And sorry. It was a particularly difficult time as I got cancer. Was so deaf that I couldn't spew nonsense about Jesse Jackson.
The millennial version is them just complaining about how cold and hungry they are over and over again.
Yeah, the millennial
pages of a book.
Each other, man. We're gonna write about we're cold. It's very bad for small businesses, particularly bars and restaurants. The margins at which they're opening up on is terrible for them. And it's another thing. It's another point that actually, again, even the myth of these people being a friend of actual small businesses is also BS, because this is terrible for them. This is just about getting people back and not paying unemployment and not creating a social infrastructure. That's it. And also, the one person who I literally hear complaining the most is the one person who does have the capacity of what's left of the federal government to do something about it and has done nothing.
The complete contradiction, the idea that we must, he could argue we got to get kids back into school. But the idea that he said how much they didn't complain during World War I. They just adapted. But we can't shut the bars and the restaurants? That's what you're leaning on? Are you effing kidding me? And we should also say that we had John Barry on to talk the history of this, but it's very possible that it was the Spanish flu, which ultimately led to the principles laid out for the Treaty of Versailles being foregone, and ultimately World War II.
Well, that's
people adapted though.
People adapted.
Nobody complained. Nobody complained about World War I. Nobody complained about those folks in Philadelphia. Nobody complained about it. The president didn't say a word about it. Of course, the president didn't say a word about it. 500,000 people died, and
there is also
relative to the population. That would be the functional equivalent of, I don't know, almost 2 million people dying.
Yeah. It's overused, but I mean, that is a real distillation of it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism right there. I mean, that is a raw expression of that. I mean, it's like everything is negotiable except the Hard Rock Cafe.
Unbelievable.
Don't wear masks, adapt, think about the cannibals. It's all in play. Human beings are incredibly resilient, but you need to have fajita night.
I think he should be the first guy out there mixing it up with the people. I'd like to see that. Rush Limbaugh, the hero, calling from a 773 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, is this me?
It is you.
All right. My name is Gabriel. I am a foreign student from Brazil who came to the U.S. to study school psychology.
Gabriel,
I wanted to talk. Oh, go ahead.
You go ahead.
All right. I just wanted to talk about the perspective of being a foreign student in the U.S. for the past 2 years and what happened in the past week or so.
Yeah, we should say, just to update people, ICE had basically said that if you are not physically attending school as a student and you're an international student, you need to leave the country immediately. And apparently yesterday, the Trump administration backed off that because it's insane. But go ahead.
Yeah, it is insane. So first, I just wanted to thank you guys for covering the clusterfuck that is Brazilian politics and the rise of Jair Bolsonaro, because let me tell you, like, piercing through the veil of just complete disinformation and dishonest narratives that is Brazilian media, we often have to rely on other people from other countries from the left to actually cut through the bullshit and give us anything that's even remotely resembling the truth. So, okay. I'm really tired of being here in the US as a student. And let me just try to explain. Normally, you can't get a student visa if your program is fully online, as it doesn't have a requirement for the person to be here in person. That much is reasonable, kind of understandable. But given that I came here for an in-person program, their decision to attempt to eject people like me is really emblematic of how the US operates regarding anybody who is not from here. It'll write rules, and then use a really narrow reading of what those rules are in order to just basically terrorize people like me. And an example that I keep coming back to is just the difference between the US and Canada. Their laws regarding immigration are pretty similar, but the way that they enforce them feels just completely different. Because, like, I lost my job when COVID came around. I was working at the library, and I wasn't eligible for any kind of government assistance. So, you know, they both wouldn't want to help me and wanted to basically just kick me out of the country. And in Canada, they both are not trying to kick people out of the country. And in fact, people who are not citizens are eligible for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, given that they meet some kind of simple conditions, which basically would have matched exactly the conditions that I was under, which is I was working, I was earning money at the library, and then I lost my job. But in here, I don't know, it just feels like they think that I go to some alternate dimension, that me losing my job is somehow qualitatively different from a person in the US losing their job. So I'm just really fucking tired, and I don't know, it just
Gabriel,
feels
but
like
Gabriel, are you aware
being here was a mistake?
Well, are you aware that we have more restaurants and bars than Canada?
Oh man, I cannot fucking wait to go to those with the wage I don't have.
Right, exactly. There's, if it's any consolation, all I can tell you is that there's a lot of Americans feeling that feeling your comparison is apt, and that a while back we played a video of somebody calling in to the Canadian unemployment agency to get there, and it was like, there's nothing in American society you can do that's that easy. Never mind public sector, never mind private sector. It was easier than going to get your paying your electric bill. It's a complete crap show. I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. It's horrible. And the only thing that is, the only upshot is that at least there was enough pushback. And I imagine to a certain extent, it is institutions that are afraid of losing their tuition fees that push back on the Trump administration.
Yeah, that was the major part of the pushback.
Kind of, big moral standing it's just tuition, because if they started ejecting people from the country and tried to switch everything to online, it probably would make people unable to achieve the goals that they wanted. And I'm in my internship year of my school psychology program, so if they had somehow decided to just kick me out, even though I have a job that's probably going to be executed mostly online, that would basically just invalidate everything. Yeah. And other people with situations that are not as don't have the safeguard of having an internship, they would probably just drop it. So
I have
it's not about morals.
I have an anecdote. I have an anecdote for you, Gabriel, which is, it's depressing, but it's funny, and it reflects the fact that you're dealing with the United States right now, but also Bolsonaro's in charge of your native country. Professor of mine told a story about how he was teaching at a community college and he had left Iran. He realized he wasn't going to go back. He was actually part of the revolution, but then the revolution consolidated around the Khomeini wing, which obviously he was not a part of. And he was doing a lecture on U.S. foreign policy and imperialism. And one of the part-time students said, "If you don't like it so much here, why don't you go back to where you came from?" And he said, "I don't like it there either."
Barry Crimmins had a good response to that. The late Barry Crimmins, he had a joke that was something to the effect of, like, people say, if you don't like this country so much, why don't you move somewhere else? And he goes, "Because I don't want to be subjected to our foreign policy."
That's good. That's very
Gabriel,
good.
Appreciate the call. Hang in there.
Good luck, brother. Thank you for
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too.
That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really good.
Yep. Calling from a 202 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Paul from D.C.
Paul from D.C. What's on your mind, Paul?
Why is this called the fun half again? I'm really depressed.
Well, sometimes it's funner than others.
Right. Anyway, the reason can I change the subject a little bit? Maybe something a little more uplifting.
Sure, of course.
Stephanie Kelton interview you had.
Yeah.
Last week, which I found fascinating. You had asked her a question towards the end, which I found to be very profound. And a little background, I've been following her for a long time, read all her academic papers and had some conversations with her. About 2 years ago, I asked her the same question you did.
Just remind us. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, why can't we just get rid of these bonds and borrowing altogether and just create the money? And back then she said, I'm thinking about that. I'm not quite there yet. But her answer was pretty profound last week when she said, "I'm there."
Yep.
That's pretty amazing, because that essentially ends the whole pay for question, and the grand bargainers can go away, and it allows us to pay for the things that we need. And I thought that was really something to pause.
Well, certainly. The interesting thing about that is, and yes, that was like, I don't know if she said that in other interviews. I'd be curious to find out. But, for a long time, people have been saying that about the money that the U.S. government has borrowed from itself, right, in terms of the Social Security Trust Fund. That this is just simply an accounting thing. Like, literally, we control both ends of that ledger. We'll just write it off. Boom. We write it off and it's gone.
Right.
And I think I imagine that the hesitation over the years has been, what are the implications that we can't really quite see when, let's say, China, China doesn't hold that much of our debt. I mean, they really don't. I mean, it's completely overstated. I mean, it's maybe double digits. They owe, like 10, 12%. I haven't checked it recently, but there is, an argument to the effect of like, well, we're all in the same sort of barrel. And if it goes over the cliff, we're all in it together on some level. Like it may give them a sense of like they're invested in the United States in some fashion, and therefore you don't want it to, it may inhibit competition. I don't know about that. I really don't have a sense, but I was struck by that as well. It's an interesting, it's an interesting question. But I really do think that if you just said like, okay, we're just going to limit the amount of debt that we sell, just as more of like a way of making people feel invested in the country who are outside the country. Maybe you could achieve the same thing. I don't know if it would be considered, real or not, something like that. But, I don't know. But yes, I found the interview very interesting, and it was really fascinating to see how her thinking on this has evolved over the years.
Yeah, I think she's caught off guard a little bit. And can I just say one more thing? Is that
Sure.
I've been following MMT for a while, and to be honest, even though I've read a lot and watched a lot of it, I don't quite get it. I get some of it, but not all of it. But I do know that for the government to be able to create money, legislation is going to be needed. There's no real mechanism for that now. I mean, the Federal Reserve Act prohibits the Federal Reserve from just writing a check to the Treasury for Congress to spend. They have kind of ways to work around that.
Right.
It's very difficult. But there is legislation to do that, and Kucinich and Conyers in 2012 introduced the NEED Act, the National Employment Emergency Defense Act, which you might want to look at. It's a fascinating bit of legislation which outlines step by step how the government can create its own money. And it's very comprehensive. If you just Google, it's 2012, Kucinich and Conyers. But of course, it didn't get out of committee because there's tremendous amount of pushback from the banking industry.
Right.
The last thing they want.
Right.
So, but it's there. It's there on paper. It's a plan. It's how to do it. And it's a really good read too.
All right.
The preamble to the bill. So.
All right.
Anyway,
I'll check it out. Thanks for the call.
interview.
Appreciate
Thank
the call.
you.
Thank you. Folks, go back and check out that Stephanie Kelton interview. It's definitely interesting. And then I would then listen to the Mike Pettis interview. Also interesting. And frankly, the Greg Mitchell was, I thought, really interesting. People forget about just how, Rush Limbaugh talked about, people didn't talk about the pandemic in 1918. And that didn't work out so well, we should tell you, A. But and B, there was a world war going on. But Greg Mitchell really documents how, remember, there's no internet. There's no journalists who were going to Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We killed hundreds of thousands of largely women and children. And with very, very little, if any, rationale. Which is not to say that there is a rationale that could justify that, but we were told we needed to do this. We did it, and that was it. And very little examination of it.
Sending a signal to the Soviet Union.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, ultimately, that's what it was.
That's the only, and again, of course, that's not a justification. That underlines how grotesque it is.
Right.
That was what was happening. That was the strategy.
Look at us. We have the material and the moral capacity to kill hundreds of thousands of people. So come for it.
Yep.
That was basically what that was all about. It really is horrific.
Fun half.
Yeah, the fun half. Hey, here's a great here's a fun. This is pretty fun. Here is Here's this is fun stuff. Here is Fox News talking about how the real American Barry Weiss was bullied out of the New York Times. There's a lot of strum and drang about this. Is that drang? What Barry Weiss, very, I don't know. Can you say mediocre writer? I mean, she was a mediocre writer who, I don't think that, she wasn't a conservative in the way that Ross Douthat is. Who
You mean
remains,
openly?
Well, here's the thing. Like
Ross Douthat's a good writer. Ross
cultural-
Douthat I learned from.
Right.
I mean, Ross
Right.
Douthat is very worth engaging in.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times some of the stuff he says is lunacy, particularly when it comes to like women and.
I'm not talking about
that's
agreeing
it.
with him. I'm
But- right,
I'm just
exactly.
drawing a basic distinction on intellectual engagement.
Exactly. But let's listen to what Fox News has to say about it.
Let's talk about what happened at the New York Times yesterday. You know about this political correctness. It was originally rolled out to rein in conservatives, or rein in people that wouldn't get in lockstep with liberal causes. And now, just like the Me Too movement, they're beginning to shoot their own. Al Franken paid the price when the Me Too movement boomeranged on him. That's an example, but there are many others. And what about what's happening in Hollywood? And more important, look what's happening at the New York Times. Believe it or not.
Pause for 1 second. This is the way that they will structure this, right? The idea that the Me Too movement is basically a fiction that is designed only to ensnare conservatives, because that's the only way you can say that it boomeranged on them with Al Franken. It didn't boomerang. Al Franken got caught up in it, but it wasn't a question of a boomerang because it wasn't aimed at conservatives. The whole movement, to a large extent, was kicked off by basically holding to an account a major Democratic donor. Harvey Weinstein, major Democratic donor. So go back. I mean, this is the way that they have to reframe every cultural movement as being a partisan thing, as opposed to a cultural divide between people who think that, hey, women have been historically, they continue to be subjected to a form of oppression that should stop. And for them, it's just about partisan politics. Oh, go ahead.
Conservatives, or rein in people that wouldn't get in lockstep with liberal causes. And now, just like the Me Too movement, they're beginning to shoot their own. Al Franken paid the price when the Me Too movement boomeranged on him. That's an example, but there are many others. And what about what's happening in Hollywood? And more important, look what's happening at the New York Times. Believe it or not, even a moderate to liberal cannot exist at the New York Times because of this new generation of radical leftists that will not hear a contrasting or a nuanced difference opinion. Case in point, Barry Weiss. She says the New York Times is not for her, and they are not, and the New York Times is not for her, and she is not for the New York Times. She resigned yesterday in a long, detailed letter. She wrote this. About 2016 in particular. The lessons of 2016 ought to have followed the election. Lessons about the importance of understanding other Americans, the necessity of resisting tribalism, and the centrality of the free exchange of ideas to a democratic society have not been learned. Instead, a new consensus has emerged in the press, but perhaps especially at this paper. The truth isn't a process of collective discovery, but an orthodoxy always known to an enlightened few whose job is to inform everyone else. So you can't have a differing opinion in the newsroom or actually in print, or else you are bullied and harassed. And he went on to even get worse. And what getting worse is, New York Times, believe it or not, almost from top to bottom, is afraid of Twitter.
Yeah, and yes, indeed.
You're welcome, guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's just absurd. You have to completely ignore the recent history she didn't lose her job. She self-expelled or whatever it was. Colin Kaepernick, on the other hand, lost his job.
And I just want to say, like, even I'm somebody that I'm on the Taibbi side of a lot of these arguments, but I just think it's like particularly extraordinary with her that she doesn't even feel a need to say, as part of this self-dramatization, I've rethought trying to get professors fired for speaking about the Middle East. I mean, this is the original example of this stuff, actually.
Yeah.
People lost jobs. Norman Finkelstein was economically terrorized, which I don't believe in, period. I mean, this guy, you could read profiles of him that is basically like, there's a little bit of work, lost the teaching job I was great at, and, basically inherited like a modest house and was able to cobble together a few things, which is why he was able to subsist. And that was all simply for saying like literal realities about Israel. So, I find that she doesn't even feel like, let me at least ass cover with that, is just
and part of it was also a function of her inability to concede anything. Like,
right.
They cited, remember there was some figure skater, and whose last name I think she had a Japanese last name. And she won something. I can't remember what the details are. I remember when it happened in time. And she tweeted out, she landed a triple axel, whatever it is. Immigrants are getting it done, or something like that. And it was a quote, or maybe she misquoted Hamilton. And people pointed out,
she should have been fired.
She's not an immigrant. She's not an immigrant. She just has a Japanese sounding last name. She's not an immigrant.
Right.
And instead of saying, my bad, that was a wrong assumption for me to have, she said, I know that. I was just making a point or something. And it's like, okay, when you're complaining about the flexibility of people's minds,
that's right,
the ability to be open and have a nuanced conversation, and you can't even admit in that instance, like, you made a mistake, but instead you have to say, no, you people are wrong, because I was just sort of extrapolating, because I guess the theory is like, well, her parents were immigrants or somebody else was immigrants and they produced people. That's absurd, because you would have to say that with every single person short of Native Americans.
Right.
Who achieve anything, and you would never do that.
Right.
And so it was basically just like, your instinct is, I assume that they're not American. Okay, fine. Live and learn. Stop making that assumption. Stop being so intellectually lazy. Be a little more conscious of what you're tweeting out. But instead, what you do is you use your authority as a New York Times columnist as a way of saying, no, you're wrong. And she didn't like the fact that people mocked her on their internal Slack over it. And it's like, you know what? I mean, these people don't walk the walk.
Right.
They deploy the talk when it suits them. And
I think the walk is really important. And that's what I'm, across the board gonna defend. But I agree with you completely. And a major reason that some really important things across the board have been so undermined is because of the blindness and cynicism of somebody like Barry Weiss. Absolutely. But I am so damn sick of talking about her, frankly. I think that was
that's the best part.
That was a job several years ago. I mean, it's enough.
We're gonna have to wait until we see where she lands, because that's gonna be a new story.
Oh, they'll do some new project.
The news is Friday
with
new
project. It'll be, but who cares?
I'm gonna sign up.
We're on this verge of a biosystems collapse.
Well, that's the other thing.
Who cares?
That's the other thing. I mean, that's what's so ridiculous about that Harper's letter. I mean, it's really just like,
thank God we timed that break.
It's like, exactly. I mean,
Well, let's
it's
keep
just-
up with the time. Let's keep up with the timing and not even go into it.
Yes, fair enough. Although there is a worry that we need to have that moms across the country, and you can ask the moms. Here's Fox and Friends teasing the new Fox Nation Moms episode about. Oh, I don't have my thunder thing. Socialism.
Moms that talks a lot about socialism in schools. Let's play a clip and then I want to get your reaction.
Do you feel like socialism is sort of seeping into the curriculum?
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. And I actually started seeing it years and years ago.
We have the ability to help our children, but also within our sphere of influence, people understand what socialism really means.
And this is a threat to our children
Yes,
and our future
absolutely.
grandchildren. Nobody fights harder than a mom.
Your thoughts, Rachel?
Jed, I'm so excited about this episode. We even have a Venezuelan, a former Miss Venezuela mom on this episode. If you're not talking to your kids about socialism, somebody is. The indoctrination is in high gear right now. I think it's going to be even worse in the fall. Parents need to educate themselves, and this is a great way to start. And I tell you, you know this as well as I do, Jed. No one fights harder than moms for their kids, and socialism is a danger to our country and to our children. So watch this episode, Fox Nation. I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, people can catch this new episode of Moms available right now on Fox Nation. You sign up today, you get your first month for just 99 cents.
There you go.
Someone's
Nice
trying to get
selfie.
the dads to watch Moms.
I wonder.
There's a Venezuelan supermodel that
Exactly.
does it like Chavez too, fellas.
I wonder what schools they're going to that they're being taught at. Is it the public schools?
Yeah, it's the public schools. It's the public schools that
They're availing themselves of these public schools, these institutions where people have pooled their resources and are providing a public service.
Well,
Is
that's
that
where
what
you
we're
would
to
teach
believe?
socialism, of course.
Yeah, of course.
That's where it's a
well,
breeding
or
ground.
actually, and that's where there's less and less time to actually read and take anything because you're being trained to take privatized testing services
Yeah.
so you can
Right.
jute stats for a re-election and sort out who's going to get a handful of dwindling professional jobs, who else is going to get permanently underpaid, and who else is going to go to jail. That's actually what's happening.
It's funny
because
that
we have been waging a nice battle against socialistic public education for a while.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's funny that she thinks this is a new fight that she's starting. Like,
Let's go to the IMs. Doc Naps. Oh, sorry. Jonathan Armstead. Had to leave early yesterday, but you cover all the Barry Whites resigning from New York Times. She claims that she was being bullied by her coworkers, led to getting so-called canceled. In reality, I think she was just upset they never stopped laughing at her for calling Dave Rubin an intellectual. Doc Naps. Hello, Sam. My mom is a special education teacher at NYC. She's worried about having to go back in the fall, but she's also concerned of the costs of teaching at home, such as electricity, internet, and air conditioning. This is another added burden for parents and teachers. Yes. Moon in the Lake. I hope also there was so much wrong with his account of the Donner Party that it would take a few paragraphs. Left Coast Lefty. Sam, I sent you an email with the heading Senator Worth's op-ed with a link to his Newsweek article. It's an absolutely chilling opinion. It states that Trump could lose both the popular vote and the Electoral College, yet legally retain the presidency. It's a must-read, and the former Colorado senator would make an excellent guest.
Who?
We'll check that out.
Which senator?
Worth? Tim
Worth?
I think so, yeah.
I think that's a congressman.
I will check that out. Huge ass. Dudes, when are we getting the international shipping on the merch? Left is best. Brendan? Oh, he's dropped out. We lost Brendan. So he didn't. Brendan, we lost him on his internet. Well. Oh, did mine just drop out?
no, you're still here.
What was that? Did I just lose my I may have just lost the phone connection. That's weird. I think I did. Hey, Sam, a friend trained as an asylum officer last year. The training facility is in Georgia, coincidentally very close to where Ahmaud Arbery was executed. She told me the CBP officers are shown footage of 9/11 as part of their training, and the cafeteria is covered in Blue Lives Matter propaganda. Oy. Even in 2019, despite all evidence to the contrary, the CBP officers she spoke to were convinced there was a link between southern border and terrorism. I mean, that's not terribly surprising, is it? It's disturbing. Joanna, the bearded Red Sox team was 2013, also the same year as the Boston Marathon bombing. Big Papi was MVP, World Series MVP. Only the second time DH won this. Big Papi is also the nickname your ex-wife gave. Okay, thank you.
Wasn't expecting that.
Bear at home too. Sam, do you have any projects with David Pakman coming up? Plus, any chance David would take Michael back? By the way, my name is pronounced Bear at Home too, or Bear for short. I have no projects with Pakman coming up. No. Q for short. Q from Boise, Idaho here. I work in a public school and we're getting ready to go back, even though our state had a 200% increase in cases in the last week and is on track to be epicenter soon. All I can say is, it's a scream. Christo, cannibalism advocate Rush Limbaugh looks terrible these days. How about one last random Rush before Rush is no longer? Maybe we should try that. I'll try and hook something like that up. Junior Mints Smoothie. Before he blocked me, I did a keyword search of Dave Rubin's Twitter for Italian, just to see if he ever said anything racist about Italians, and found that he has a series of reoccurring tweets for years where he comments on street fairs and whether or not they have hot Italian sausages. He also, for some reason, repeatedly tries to use the gay Italian mafia as a punchline. Just some food for thoughts.
Jesus Christ.
I wish I did.
I hear people use that punchline in New York. That's a New York thing or something.
I saw Dave. I think and I don't, I actually never really made fun of Dave that much on Twitter, but I think what got me blocked was he just tweeted out something like, "I'm going to New Jersey," and then he used a Sopranos gif of honestly, probably like the least creative line in Sopranos history. It was like Tony saying something like, "You got a problem with that?" And I think I just responded like, "You don't need to do this." That was it.
And that's what got you.
Yeah, it's all right. You don't need to do this.
Folks, if you're hanging on the phone, I cannot log back in. So we are done with the phones today. Apologies. I'm not sure why, but I just simply can't do it. I can't get to the server to do that. So let's do a couple of IMs and then we will head out of here. Mail-in ballots. Good afternoon, MR crew. Just received my mail-in ballots for Florida's primary race in August. I've been hard at work. Oh, we should talk about, there were some big progressive wins in Texas.
Yes. Very good results.
Very encouraging. And with a chance of picking up a couple of progressive seats in the House, which is a big deal. Progressives have done pretty well in this primary season relative to 2018.
Yes. There's been some improvements.
Candace Valenzuela and Mike Siegel, John from San Antonio, had called in about both those guys yesterday. They, it's not completely done because there's still absentee ballots, but they have strong leads against centrist opponents in Travis County. No, excuse me. In suburban counties, Travis County District Attorney race, Jose Garza, an immigrant rights activist and former public defender, also endorsed by the DSA, ousted an incumbent. There is a Senate fight. It looks like the DSA, the progressive did not win. But it was a close race anyways. And we have, there's about 4 or 5 other progressives, of course, Mondale Jones and Jamal Bowman in particular. There could be the caucus around the squad, if you will, could end up being, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 strong. And then you're starting to get into some numbers that can actually have a little bit of leverage.
That's true. I still want to just say to caution that, and these are great results, but I think, the real challenge is going to be is, can you have people who have some solid sort of progressive positions that can win in seats that are perceived of as nationally competitive by the leadership? Like, seats these are, and so I need to look more into these, but these are different.
Valenzuela and Siegel are in Republican held suburban districts.
So this is huge.
Yeah,
and they need to win those.
This is the Guastella, not the AOC.
This is the Dustin Guastella test right here. It's really important.
I mean, I think that there is more value than is given credit for having progressives win in blue seats, both in terms of like what it does to the party and specific votes, because AOC made this point when she was on, that having an Elliot Engel in a blue seat where he's voting against the Iran deal, let's say, for instance,
absolutely, yep,
it gives so much cover to people who are ostensibly not from blue seats or as blue seats to vote. And when you lose that cover, it has an impact on the way that people vote. And
undoubtedly it's important. It's just the next phase of the kind of test. But of course, I mean, those are big upgrades. We actually covered last night the contest for the next chair of foreign relations. And that one was very interesting to look at because the progressives,
Joaquin Castro is
they're lining up behind Joaquin Castro. I think, he's saying the right things. His record isn't anything to write home about. The one that was very interesting to me, I wouldn't support him. I would support Castro. But Brad Sherman, who in some ways has a similar profile to Engel, he voted for the invasion of Iraq. He was, I think, against the Iran deal. So terrible Middle East record. But he led the whole interview with, which was fascinating. He's like, look, the main issue we're going to be dealing with is blowing up the Pentagon budget for a Cold War with China. And I know we don't need to do that. I know it's BS, and I know how to undermine it. And I know that this is just their excuse for their budgetary priorities. And that was fascinating to see the guy in the right-wing lane actually have like the clearest, like on the biggest issue, I'm going to have a conflict with the Pentagon. That was fascinating.
Right. And Meeks is the other guy. And Meeks
is probably, I bet Meeks might probably get it. He's kind of the, liked by most sort of consensus candidate, but does not, I mean.
He's horrible on a lot of other
issues.
He's
horrible on a lot of, he's somebody who, the big distinction is Joaquin Castro is making a few comments on Palestinians. Meeks is definitely not going to do that. Meeks is a guy who's going to sit with the leadership and do whatever, whatever the path of least resistance is. Yep. Like, honestly, I would, with Sherman talking the way he talked on the Pentagon budget in China, I probably would prefer him to Meeks, frankly.
Let's go to mail-in ballots. I've been hard at work researching the best candidates for each race. Two things I've noticed. In each of the judicial races, one candidate has supported the police and police chief union, and the Democratic candidates for Florida 15 are pretty slippery in their answers to my straightforward questions. I've been holding them to account, though. Good. Silver Ball Stud. Sam, I live in a major American city. Our local police department is under control of our state's capital, not our municipal government. Obviously, regaining local control has been a primary demand of our city demonstrations. Was wondering if you or the crew had awareness of such policy and or if it exists in other American cities. Shows me an overlap between the message in the streets in our state and the need for direct electoral change in the fall. When one governor's campaign on unloading a banana clip into a lake and then resigns over sexual assault and other crimes, his replacement usually needs to go as well, especially when he wants to open schools. I don't know if that's the case in other states. I really don't. All right, let's take 5 more of these. Ghost of Marx's beard. The people at the germ factory aren't getting sick, making schools into petri dishes in the middle of the pandemic to save the economy. Not 100% sure I know what that means. Annoying pendant. Larry Vaughn, the mayor in Jaws, who covered up one of the deadly shark attacks to keep the beaches open, which led to at least 2 more deaths. Still the mayor of Amity in Jaws 2. That's why you need to get involved with local politics and never let incumbents get comfortable. Jaws is a story. This is what we are going through. Mm-hmm. Jaws is a perfect metaphor for this. I have more appreciation for that movie now. Space Lennon. I'm a union organizer calling in from 208 to talk about schools. All right, darn it. Well, call back in on Friday. I'd love to talk to you about that. Henry Wadsworth, YouTube has gotten horrible lately. I wish I could see some of the clips that Sam and Michael want to show, along with the 40 ads per clip without them being demonetized. 2 more. Riley from Minnesota. I just got a job getting Ilhan reelected. We need all the help you can get to volunteer. IlhanOmar.com. Please help if you can.
Congrats.
Tad Hughes in 2 great breaks on race. Note why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. By Rennie Edo Lodge and Natives, Class and Race in the Ruins of Empire by Akala. Both excellent. I haven't heard of either one of those.
Racecraft by the Field Sisters.
And here is the final I am of the day. I drove an hour out of Cincinnati to get my COVID test, only to find out it's a 12-day wait. That ain't going to work, folks. All right, Michael, Matt, Brendan, good job, guys. Thank you. We will see you folks tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made.